Is Leon Edwards the worst champion in the UFC? Probably not. But before Mark and I talk about this, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe as we have brand new videos every single week. So, Mark, I'm going to start with a very simple, basic question. Is Leon Edwards a bad champion?
I think it's not necessarily a bad champion. It's just he's got worse luck than Roy Orbison. Especially in recent years, Leon Edwards like missing fights, eye pokes, getting punched by people backstage, that kind of thing. And so he's had to carry all that with him. He got the fantastic knockout over Kamaru last year, and then he beat him in a decision after that. I just wish he was more active. Take all that out of the equation, and I really, really do wish Leon was seeing him more in the octagon. Because I'd like to see Rocky fight a lot more. There's so many fights there where it's like a dream almost. You want to stick him in there, but I mean, he just seems happy just to be pacing. I think he struggled with speech therapy. The irony in that I stumbled my way through saying that as well. But I'd love to see him more active. Then I'll actually define him as a good champion.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's difficult to sort of quantify where Leon is as a champion because, he's not really had a title reign yet. He's had one defense, and that defense is a little bit controversial. He cheated a lot. The judges seemed a little bit all over the place. I'm not taking anything away from his win, but I'm just saying it was a very interesting fight. And he's not an overly active fighter. Even before he became a champion, we were lucky if he fought 1 or even 2 times a year. And he seems more focused on getting the right matchup for himself, which again, I don't think is necessarily a problem because you want to sell as many pay-per-views as possible. And it seemed that he was waiting for Masvidal. So when that fight with Colby first got announced, he knew that if Masvidal could beat Gilbert Burns, that is a much, much bigger rematch. And they'd probably tell Colby to sack it off. But just while we're sort of on the topic of Colby, is Colby a good number 1 contender? Because a champion is only as good as the contenders he's got to fight, right?
If you'd have asked me 18 months ago, I'd have said yes. And this is coming from me as a Colby fan. Right now, Colby has done nowhere near enough work I don't think, to still be the number 1 contender. The division's been busy, whilst Colby hasn't. His last win was George Masvidal, a decision win over, let's face it, a seasoned veteran like George Masvidal, whose better days have been long gone. And then he's just waited because Dana at the time said, yep, Colby is next 100%. And it's as if he's just took that to the bank and just waited on it. I honestly think that he's holding the division back.
Yeah.
With this claim to the title.
Yeah, 100%. But again, it's so tricky for me to blame Colby for that because I agree. But I think both Leon and Colby have ruined this division. It is stale. It is boring. Nobody has fought in such a long time. It's just getting ridiculous. So, but if I was Colby Covington and I was sat on a title shot, why would I risk it? Right? Why would you risk it? You think, well, Dana White's already said I'm going to get the next title shot. Why would I fight anyone else? So I think it's less Colby's to blame, and maybe it's the UFC to blame. It's them. It's Hunter and Dana White making this terrible matchmaking. I don't know why they've announced, right, Colby's going to fight Leon. Leon's not agreed to it. Nobody signed pen to paper. So it just seems like this fight is just taking such a long time to come together. What do you think, Matt? Who do you think's to blame for the stagnation of this division?
The scary thing about it is that win over Masvidal that Colby had last year, this was before Usman was knocked out by Leon. So obviously after that, especially with it being a flash knockout, the whole Rocky storyline, all that kind of thing, you have to make the rematch. So Colby's been promised the title shot before them 2 fights even happened. So what's he doing? Just waiting for them to do a quadrilogy, because that's actually the 3rd fight they had, wasn't it? Yeah. And then he gets the title shot. You're like, why? I find it such a hard balance, and I'll probably sound just like a greedy fan because you go, well, on one hand, yeah, everyone wants to be the champion, but at the same time, if you want that legacy, you will just be remembered as the guy who just picked fights and just sat back and waited. If you look at Colby's wins, really, I mean, Robbie Lawler, RDA, Damian Maia. You know, I'm not taking anything away from these guys because they were beasts at the time, but nowadays doesn't really stand up. Robbie Lawler's retired. Where's Damian Maia? RDA getting a bit seasoned now. So there's no notable wins on his record where you're like, he definitely deserves it. You know, I don't know. I'd say Colby is partly to blame because it's almost like you promised me, so I'm not going to do a thing until that day comes. I don't know.
But then
it's a rough one, and I really wish this division would just get back on its feet again, because welterweight it's got the potential to be one of the most exciting divisions.
Yeah, 100%. It's got a huge, interesting talent pool. But the big problem is, do we even know if Colby's been offered another fight? You know, if it's, Dana's more stubborn than anyone. That's who I'm really putting all the blame on. For me, it's 100% Dana. He's forced this match that the champion doesn't want, the audience doesn't particularly want. Like, I don't know anyone pining for Leon versus Colby. And you and I are both big Colby fans. But people are wanting it now because we've been waiting so long. We're just like, I'll just do it now, It's like you just want to get it done. And I think you made such an interesting point about Colby's sort of legacy and his notable wins. The biggest things that Colby's done is lose to Usman twice. Those are the biggest moments in his career, and they're two fantastic fights. Because don't forget, in that first fight, he broke his jaw, came back and won that next round. And that second fight was razor thin, super, super close. But that's not enough to build a legacy on, right? Now is Colby's time. If he beats Leon at the end of the year, assuming it is at the end of the year, that's his chance to really cement his legacy. He cannot just win that and retire. He then has to fight the top contenders. He has to make a name for himself. Otherwise, he will be just remembered as the guy who lost to Usman twice.
But whilst he's off trying to make America great again, I'd love it if he could try and make the welterweight division great again as well. If he became champion, Dwayne, and he was taking on all these contenders, then honestly, fair enough. But like you said then, that was an interesting point where you said his biggest moments in the UFC is losing to Usman. You don't want to fall into, bear with me when I say this, you don't want to fall into that Rory McDonald category where ultimately Rory lost that fight against Robbie, but that's regarded as one of the best fights ever in the UFC, one of the most intense fights. You don't want to fall into that. You want to build your own, surely. This is speaking as someone who's never stepped foot in a cage, but you know what I mean? It's a rough one. It's a really rough one because now we are all pining for that fight. I just want the belt to throw it up in the air and see whoever's the tallest can grab it the quickest. Then we've got a new champion. Move on.
Well, now that we've had the UFC WWE merger, we could just do a Royal Rumble, get everyone in the octagon, and just do it that way instead. We'll finally have a bloody champion either way, or at least a defense. But then let's sort of talk about the contenders, the current people who are there. So don't forget, Usman's still there. He's ready for a fight. And the big problem for Usman is he was supposed to be fighting Khamzat Chimaev, but Khamzat didn't want to make the weight. And Usman was like, well, who are you? Who are you to say, right, I've got to come up to another weight division to fight you? You're wanting to be the contender in my division. I'm the number one contender. I'm the ex-champ, arguably one of the best welterweights of all time, just under GSP. Who is Khamzat to say, right, you have to come and fight me in a higher division? Where does Usman play in all of this? Because it feels like if his knees can hold up and he's not as old as he looked last time, he is right back in that title picture at any point.
Well, yeah, aside from that last fight that he had with Leon, it was always in the fight. It wasn't a beat down or anything like that. It was razor thin, especially with the point deduction and that kind of thing. But let's not forget who Kamaru Usman is. Keep that respect on his name. He was one of the busiest champions that you've ever seen. Taking on contenders, he took the belt off Tyron Woodley and his soul, by the way. Then, there was, who else did he fight? Then it was Colby. He's beat Masvidal twice, Gilbert Burns, all this, Usman was a monster. He still is a monster. And so let's keep that. And I agree with that. Who is Khamzat Chimaev to be saying, dictating that he doesn't want to make the weight? If you don't want to make the weight, right, stay at middleweight, then who cares?
Yeah.
Keep Usman there. But other contenders, like you were saying, though, There's plenty of them, and just nothing's happening. I think there's a thing that I've seen online where it's saying all the top 10 welterweights don't have a fight booked. Not one of them.
No, it's mental.
Crazy.
That's
craziness.
Division. How could and that's the problem is we were talking about it earlier. Everybody wants to be the champion, right? That's the goal. So if say I'm ranked 4th or 5th, right? I know if I get a decent win, I could be moving into a title shot. But I don't know when the number 1 contender and the champion are going to fight. So why would I rush? Why am I going to take a fight now, wait another 3-4 months for the champions to fight, and I've got to fight someone else in between that? And I know it's so selfish of these fighters, I guess, in a sense, and to have that mindset. But it's right, though, isn't it? Why would you rush yourself into fighting when you don't need to, and then possibly risk your title opportunity? It's like, look at Gilbert Burns. He was probably going to get the next title shot after Leon versus Colby, right? But then he fought that fight with Bilal, naffed up his shoulder, and got battered, for 5 rounds. And he took that fight on a very, very short notice. And so did Bilal. Because he fought, what was it, a month before or something? Burns just needs to relax and rest, take his time, and that's what's difficult, isn't it? Because we're complaining that the division slowed too much, and now I've just complained that Gilbert Burns was fighting too much. It's like they can't win, really.
But the thing is, people like Bilal, he definitely he's got a stronger claim to a title shot than Colby does right now. I 100% believe. I don't want to see Bilal as a champion because his fighting style is dull. Let's face it. There's no other way to put it, is there? I understand the technical aspect and that kind of thing, but there's no one getting off their ass to run to the pub to go watch Bilal Muhammad fight, is there? Yeah. But there's a few contenders, I think, though, in the division, Dwain, who are actually in quite a good spot. They've actually benefited. One that springs to mind is Ian Garry. Now, he's just battered the living hell out of Neil Magny for 3 rounds. Now, that's very recent. By the time he's ready for a fight and he's got another one scheduled, I'm not saying he's due in line for a title shot. He's got another 1, 2 at the most fights to get before he gets to the title shot maximum. He's in a really beneficial position, I believe, because he's just come off a dominating win against Neil Magny, who is no joke himself. So he's going to be up against someone, who's right up there with him. It's going to be a real test for him. All this mess, hopefully, has all blown over since then, so that he steps right back in at the perfect time. I'm not really suggesting putting him against Shavkat or something, because I think that'd be a massacre. But I'm just saying they're both contenders. Shavkat's undefeated, and
100%. I mean, I'm not a big fan of putting prospects against each other, to be honest, either. I don't want to see Shavkat versus Ian Garry, at least not yet. I want to see these guys build up, and then when they're both contenders, then put them together. Don't ruin one of your prospects now. Don't throw them away, because whoever loses that fight, it's kind of the end for that big jump as that next big.
Well, whoever wins that fight, the UFC loses, sort of thing. But then, I get that aspect, and I'm in the same boat as well. But that's when you think, well, you don't want to go too far down that route where you almost pave the way, because, well, it doesn't make sense, like the WWE merger. You're like, well, it doesn't make sense for Roman Reigns to lose yet. So if we keep him with the title now, we'll move on this way. You don't want to get too far down that, but it makes 0 sense for them two to fight at the minute.
Yeah, 100%. And Shavkat is almost, like you're saying, in the exact same position as Ian Garry is. While all the contenders and the top 10 guys, well, top 5, I guess, because Shavkat's like 7th, is it? I don't know where he is. But these top guys, while they're waiting around doing nothing, if you've got these prospects coming up, getting some notable wins, they're going to go past. They're going to jump up that division. And someone who's really, really interesting, and he's not a new contender, he's not even new to the division, but it's Kelvin Gastelum. He seems very poised to come down a whole weight division. And I was actually, if he came out and looked good in the weigh-ins, I was actually going to pick him to beat Shavkat. And I know that sounds wild, and a lot of people thought it was just going to be a mauling. But I think people forget Kelvin has fought at the highest level. Outside of Strickland and Alex, he gave Izzy a run for his money and gave him some real big problems. But the problem for Kelvin is He's in the wrong weight division. He's too small. He's smaller than some of the lightweights. So welterweight, I think if he can get a good weight cut, he can cause a lot of problems in that division. And we could see him chomping at the bit for a title shot because he's a big, big name as well.
Kelvin Gastelum, put his name in there. He definitely belongs in the mix. I'd like to see. He's another one, a bit like Leon. He seems to be quite unlucky with. He's pulled out a lot of fights due to injury, that kind of thing. Yeah. When he gets going, Kelvin can really turn it on. I wasn't blown away by his performance against Chris Curtis, I believe. It was earlier this year, I think. But then again, that was at middleweight, wasn't it? Yeah. So if he comes back down, maybe the weight cut will do him good, etc. It's just name value. But I think with the mess of the welterweight division right now and a few contenders that we've already named, Kelvin would have to pull something out of his arse pretty special in order to put his name right up there in that mix. Especially with the iffy past couple of years he's had at middleweight.
I think you make a good point, but I actually don't agree. I think Kelvin has got such a big name, and when we're so hungry for contenders in that division, I think if he fought Shavkat and beats Shavkat, they're gonna let's get this guy up there, and he'll be fighting maybe number 1, number 2, and then a title shot. He is a breath away from being a champion in that division. But again, it all depends what his weight cut's like. That's what if he can be healthy at that weight, because we've seen it before, people come down and they're really struck. Like, look at Dan Hooker when he went all the way to featherweight. He looked like a rake who would topple over at any point, and he did. So they've got to be so careful with those weight cuts.
If Kelvin came down to fight Shavkat, I think that would be make or break for Kelvin.
Yeah.
Because if he beats Shavkat, he beats the undefeated prospect, and that boosts him up. I don't know, it won't get a title shot straight away because it doesn't deserve the first fight in the division. But if Shavkat beats him, going off the past few years of his career, I think, I'm not saying cut or anything like that, but I'm just saying I'd be looking on Twitter or X for the UFC roster watch. I'd be looking for updates, put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. It is make or break, isn't it? And it feels right now that it's make or break for this whole division. And I'm just really interested to see where it is next year. If in a year's time it's still like this, I'm going to be heartbroken. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. But I do think that's all we've got time for. Thank you for watching. If you can like, comment, and subscribe, it really does help us out.